If he is having trouble feeling loved by God, he's probably having trouble feeling loved by you, and it doesn't have anything to do with either one of you. Basically, he's built the same wall between you and him and the same wall between himself and God.
Welcome to the Couple Cure.
One challenge for men who are addicts is that they have a knowledge of God, but they do not have an experience with God. And I feel like that can show up one of two ways. Their knowledge of God has led them to a life of checking boxes. He's just something else that they have to do in their day that keeps a certain image alive for them. I think for another man, it feels very hollow, not because he doesn't know about God, but because when he goes looking for God, it doesn't feel very deep. It doesn't feel very connected. And so he's wondering if there's a flaw within him, or he's one of those people that just doesn't understand God very well. When you look at the different 12-step guides, they describe God as a God of your understanding, not someone else's understanding, which has been part of the problem. They've just relied on someone else to tell them who God is, and they don't have a deeper experience of him. And out of that grows, again, one of those two results, either somebody who is checking boxes or somebody who is desperately wants to connect with God and doesn't really feel anything there. It's like an empty space for them. It may not be evident by how much he goes to church or how much he begins to pray or read the Bible. But if he starts to ask questions, or if you start to see him respond with more gratitude or forgiveness or patience, then he is having that experience that he needs. And what you really want for him is a spiritual connection that holds when other things fall apart, that he's not only counting on you or only counting on having the right men in his life, but he's counting on something bigger than himself as well. I know that might be challenging because you're in pain. He's done something that's caused a lot of hurt, and you want to see him change and follow a certain path. And it just may not look exactly the way you want it to look. So my encouragement is to write a resume for God. Who would you want God to be in your life? What 30 characteristics could you imagine God having? And I asked them to write those things down. Not because that takes away from who God is, because honestly, God is all of those things, but it helps them to get past the negative understandings they have of God as judgmental and distant and unloving and uncaring. Many of them lack that experience, that interaction with God looking at them and saying how wonderful. The loving father who looks over the edge of the crib and sees his newborn son and just says how wonderful. And it doesn't matter if that baby is smiling at him or that baby has a dirty diaper. The loving father says how wonderful. He sees a child that he loves, a child that is his. And many of the men that I know, many of the men that I work with don't have that experience, not because God isn't doing that, but because they simply have not experienced it. They've seen it as an intellectual pursuit, or they've been told that if they're not hearing from God, they're doing something wrong. And that's not really true. They have the same thing we talked about in the last episode, that shame raincoat that says, I cannot be loved, I cannot be acceptable. And so their experience of God, or all the things that have been said about God to them, hit that same raincoat and fall off. And it's not until they experience God that raincoat gets removed. I know a lot of guys like myself who have had experiences with God where it was very hypey and very mountaintop feeling, that it was for this weekend or it was for this one night of music or whatever it might have been, that I had an emotional experience, but I didn't have a deeper experience of God. And so those moments would fade rather quickly. For men to do this well is going to require them to pay attention. For me, I asked God to show me his love for me, and he did that. And I tell the story in the other video because I think for men it's possibly more impactful, but I had to start paying attention. I had to see God in a new way and through new interactions that I could experience him at a deeper level. And I needed that to begin to actually build roots instead of simply being an intellectual pursuit. I'm all for him experiencing God and having a deeper relationship with him and letting you off the hook to be his spiritual director, or he's probably abdicated and is waiting on you to do it for him. And he really needs to do this for himself. On the Storm Ready channel, I share a story about where God showed up for me. It has to do with a plastic bag in the middle of the road, and as ridiculous as that sounds, that to me is the very heart of spiritual experience. Is it doesn't necessarily make sense. It's not something that is even easily explained, but when it happens at a deep level for us. It is something that we can point to and say, that's where God showed up for me. It's not your fault, but it is something that he needs to address and something that I want him to work on to get past that wall. And once he can be loved by God, then he can also be loved by you, to receive that love from you in a way that he hasn't in the past. If your husband is struggling, if the man in your life is struggling, I highly recommend that you send him to Storm Ready Men to take the assessment, to see where he can begin to work in his life, what elements he might need to help him on this journey. Next time, we're going to be talking about not only self-awareness, but self-acceptance. Self-acceptance is another element that helps them remove that shame raincoat and move into a deeper understanding of who they are and a more stable way of living. Thanks for your time today, and I'll see you on the next episode.